Let's move on. Please come to order for the September 9th special meeting of the Glendale Successor Agency. May we have roll call, please?
Agency members: Devine.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Jarian. Weaver. Chair Sinanian.
Here. May we have the report, please?
The agenda for the September 9th, 2014 regular or special public meeting of the Successor Agency was posted on Thursday, September 4, 2014 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. First item before you is approval of minutes for the special Successor Agency meeting of Tuesdays, July 22nd and August 12th, 2014.
May we have roll call, please?
Well, motion.
I'm sorry, is there a motion
So
to?
move.
Yeah,
Move to approve. I believe I was here for both of those, right? So I will second.
Okay, let's have roll call now.
Agency members: Devine.
Here. Yes.
Friedman.
Yes.
Jarian. Weaver. Chair Sinanian.
Yes. Next, please.
Next item, item 2, is Director of Economic Development regarding recognized obligation payment schedule, ROPS 1415B for January to June 2015. 2A is a resolution adopting ROPS 1415B, including administrative budget for same period.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, sir. This is that magical time of the year when we bring forward our recognized obligation payment schedule that is submitted to the state. This is a rather iterative process, and so the Department of Finance for the state of California has requested some adjustments be made. Here to summarize those adjustments is Cassandra Pruitt, our administrative officer, with a brief presentation.
Good afternoon, agency chair and members. I'm Cassandra Pruitt with Community Development. For the benefit of agency member Devine, I was going to give a little more detail than I normally give, but it won't be too long. So I'm presenting the latest and greatest ROPS, which is the Recognized Obligation Payment Schedule. The dissolution of redevelopment agencies statewide in 2012 essentially halted all redevelopment activities. The only projects that were allowed to proceed were ones that the State Department of Finance deemed eligible through a comprehensive vetting process. Thus, every 6 months, agencies must document their financial obligations coming due via the ROPS. The item in front of you today is for consideration for the ROPS that covers the period of January to June 2015 and the report of expenditures for the period ending June 30, 2014. You will notice I've distributed a revised ROPS from the one you received in your packet. Because the ROPS is based on cash balances as of June 30, and because the city does not fully close its accounting books before the ROPS due date, staff works on the report up until the last minute to ensure the ROPS includes the most accurate numbers. On top of this challenge, just 3 business days ago, the Department of Finance provided revised instructions to staff on how to prepare the ROPS. This required us to re-review and revise the report. The revisions involved recategorizing funding sources and utilizing all existing funding before requesting new funding. The revisions did not result in a significant change to the total funding amount of $27 million. They only resulted in changes to how much funding will be charged to various pots of money. Specifically, we will request $3.7 million less new funding and use existing funding instead. The total ROPS funding of $27 million breaks down as follows. $13 million in 2010 bond proceeds to pay for the Paseo and Central Library projects, $8.5 million in reserve funds to pay for the Alex Theater, Mona, and Lemley projects, and public improvements in accordance with the KABC agreement, and some of the debt service on the agency's outstanding bonds, $5 million in new funding to pay for all other costs, including debt service payments, KABC Disney public improvement set-asides, contractual services, and project management staff. And it includes an increase in administrative costs from $260,000 to $370,000. To summarize, with this ROTS, we will have almost fully spent down the funds in our possession. Going forward, we will need to request new funding to fund our obligations. Upon your approval, this schedule must be reviewed and approved by the Oversight Board, then sent to the Department of Finance by October 1st. Funding is received on January 2nd to pay for expenses for January to June 2015. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Yes.
So why are we doing this? Why are we making this change? And that's question one. And question two, and I know that's probably a big answer, and question two is, do we anticipate receiving the rest of the funds to complete the ROPS? So those are my two questions.
Yes, the first is because the way the Department of Finances asked us to characterize what were reserve funds, it was ROPS funding we asked for in a prior period. We were putting it as reserve because we hadn't spent it yet. We were reserving it. They said, no, put that on as a ROPS request, and then we'll deduct that and add it. It's a little complicated. The net is no effect.
Okay, so that's the main point.
Correct.
You believe the net has no effect. You don't think they're being tricky here?
No.
They're gonna.
No, in fact, what they're wanting to do and what we want to do is get out of the redevelopment business, spend down that money, and we're putting it in all the boxes that you've told us to for projects and debt service.
So
And
this
then
is not a material change
No.
to anything except the way that we're doing our bookkeeping. Basically.
Correct.
It mostly reflects the timing that we have to submit information to them. They comment, comes back to us, and then it goes back to them.
Do you feel that this is not the first step to some trick, as we've seen before, of a way for them to kind of get out of the obligations that they've committed to and that we've committed to?
No, I think this is just, the entire process is distasteful, but this is just the execution of that process.
That last sentence, or next to last sentence, was kind of ominous. It said that we have no funds to meet any future obligations that we'll need to. I mean,
We're just spending down our existing funds.
Right.
And going forward, we will request new funding on each ROPS instead of.
right, I mean, that's not an extraordinary statement, right? That's just course of business. That's how it's
In
that's
fact,
how it's
Only
done.
if they, the state of California, wanted to default or force us into default, which would be their default,
Then
by
we would have
not
a
forwarding
problem.
funds for future ROPS.
That's when we would have an extraordinary situation. Otherwise,
And they would be on the hook for that by recognizing these are recognized obligations. They're saying that they're recognized obligations. Their forcing of us into default is them forcing themselves
To default.
into default.
that word recognize would mean nothing at that point.
Right. And so they want us to spend all the cash on hand before they give us any cash.
Great. Okay, that's how they want it.
I just,
Yes.
if I could, just thank you for the brief lesson, and kudos for having this done in a couple of days, because this is a lot of work, and I really appreciate that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, move the item.
Second?
Well, may we have roll call, please?
Agency members Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian, Weaver, Chair Sinanian.
Yes, next item, please.
Next item is Director of Economic Development regarding legislation report update. This is an oral report only.
Mr. Lanzafame?
Mr. Chairman, we're in with the successor agency. We wanted to give you a brief overview of where some of the redevelopment legislation is today. Some of it is very important to us, and some of the efforts we did on others were critical. So I wanted to give you a brief outline on that. There is a bill, AB 2280, put forth by Assemblymember Alejo. This would bring back a form of redevelopment to California. I wanted to make you aware of it. This council and this agency has been very clear in that we want to move past redevelopment, and we want to do our own thing. So I wanted to make you aware of this. It is for the lowest of income areas within the state. These would be set up in areas where the median income is 80%, less than 80% of the state average median. Crime is 5% more than the state average. So these are extraordinary places where you would still use redevelopment. It would still feel the same as it did before. That is on the governor's desk, and the league and others are asking for support on that. Assembly Bill 2493, Assemblymember Bloom has offered this. This is what we call the bond legislation. This is legislation that would allow us to use our 2011 bonds. That the knock on that is that there were Mardi Gras, what they're calling Mardi Gras bonds, where people went out in drunken stupors and issued debt for things that they had no idea what they were going to use it for. So what the bill has done is it has added criteria that says if you have been planning these projects and you were going to use long-term debt for them and you can meet this criteria, you can go ahead and use your 2011 bonds. This is a bill that the agency and city council supported. It has made it through both houses and is on the governor's desk for signature. We believe that all of our projects would meet this criteria. Namely, we would have the central library, and the bill also allows you to reimburse non-redevelopment funded projects. So Central Avenue, where we use tax dollars, gas tax dollars, we could potentially reimburse that fund to use those monies elsewhere in the city for traffic and road.
If I can just interrupt you for 1 second. Did our lobbying efforts with respect to the AB 2493 bear result in terms of support from our supervisor?
Yes. I'm sorry. No. At this point, and I don't know whether he's made a decision or not.
Okay.
We put on a press at the final hour where the team, the legislative team, is really looking is not so much getting through the Assembly and the Senate. It's on the governor's desk, and they would really like the County of Los Angeles
To lend its
to
support.
either support or stay neutral on that.
But they haven't done any greater harm. So
I see.
to that end, I think the efforts, the call that you made,
Okay.
certainly, I think, stymied any negative momentum
Right.
against us.
Because we have $50 million
Correct.
approximately 2011 bonds, and ours are not drunken stupor bonds. Those are
No.
bonds that are well planned out, well intentioned, had well been planned out prior to 2011. So they just
Very much so.
they should be. I mean, regardless of whether the governor okays this bill or not, our bonds should be honored because those are good bonds. It should through the proper process, through the proper channels. So.
Most definitely. The maturity of the redevelopment project area, the fact that we were almost to the end of the life of the agency demonstrates, I think, that this was a scheduled bond issue that would allow us to do these public improvements, so you're absolutely right.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that interruption.
Nope. Senate Bill 1129, offered by Senator Steinberg. This is a cleanup bill for dissolution. It also provided added benefits for agencies. It includes the authority to use 2011 bonds. There's some expedited approval of long-range property management plans. But where the bill really would be beneficial for Glendale is it adds some certainty for agencies. Some of the certainty would be on activities that we are already past, but others would be like no compensation agreements required for properties that are being held by the city for future development. That was not a sticking point, but it was one of the things that the Department of Finance asked us to put into our plan, and so we had used some language to say that we intend to. This would obviously erase that requirement. There is language in this bill that was added to clarify the interpretation on the city's loan. This is probably the biggest thing for us in front of the governor right now. The way that the Department of Finance is interpreting the law and the way that just about everybody else we've talked to is interpreting it is a difference of about $30 million for the city of Glendale. So this is critically important for us. The knock on this bill is that it goes too far in providing benefits that the state would rather slow that down. So we're not sure, in talking to our lobbyist, we're not sure that the governor will actually sign this bill, and then whether there's enough support for an override or not, we don't know. But this would be a bill that would certainly help the city of Glendale, if for nothing else, on clarifying that loan language. And then, speaking of that, I do want to call out Assembly Bill 1582. This bill was offered by Assemblymember Mullen originally to change the ROPS schedule from a 6-month schedule to an annual schedule so it would coincide with everybody's budget, and we hope to make it easier and more efficient. The governor would prefer that piece of legislation go in next year with his budget to coincide with the moving of the oversight boards to a central location in 2016. So he made it very clear that he was not going to sign Assemblymember Mullen's bill. So that bill was then offered to what I'll call the Glendale bill, was really a guide and amend to include the loan language. And just that, to just clarify that one issue. And we'd hoped that it would gain enough support to get in front of the governor. Unfortunately, it did. There was a lot of support by our legislators, and it got to a position where we were seeking a waiver to have that bill go to the floor for a vote. Just political dealings held it hostage. The Speaker was not willing to pay the price that was being asked to release the bill, and so it ultimately failed to get out of committee. But in bringing this legislation forward, we really raised the profile of our issue, and it's an issue with, we think, maybe 40 other agencies across the state. That is, how do you interpret that loan language and what's fair? Again, I want to thank Assemblymember Gatto, who met with us for the Department of Finance, championed this through the Assembly, Senator Liu, who got it out of committee in Senate. They were both right there with us. They understood the issue. They were very, very helpful. Our bargaining units were also great in terms of reaching out to their state brethren for support. Specifically, GCEA got their lobbyist involved in this. Officer Jason Ross made some contacts and got it first in front of Assemblymember Gatto and then with police unions. And then really, really thanks to Captain Chris Stavros. Chris used his affiliation with California Professional Firefighters to get this on their radar. What's significant about that is the California Professional Firefighters were on the team, the architects of the dissolution of redevelopment. They just philosophically disagreed with it. And that's fine. In fact, when we started talking about it, they said, you do understand that we were on the other side. And when we made it clear to them that this council has said, you know, what's past is past, we're moving forward, but this just isn't right. It's not treating the cities fairly. The California Professional Firefighters looked at the issue, and then they got very supportive. They went to the governor, they went to legislators, and in fact, they said this just is not fair to cities going forward. So again, big thanks to Chris and the California Professional Firefighters. That concludes my report. Staff that's worked on this legislation is here if you have any questions. There are some other tools that are making their way through legislation that might be helpful for us in terms of economic development in the future, but these are the four main redevelopment bills.
And we appear to have no questions. So thank you. Mr. Clerk, what's next?
There are no other items on the agenda.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
Okay, and we are adjourned at 3:38.